The last time I heard my daughter laugh, it was over the phone, telling me she had sold my family ranch for $2 million and left me with nothing. She thought I was old, frail, and disposable. She didn't know I had been building a trap for her, legal and financial, for 40 years, and that her lavish new lifestyle would last exactly as long as it took her to figure out. Out west, land is dust. Water is everything. I'm Harry, and that ranch in Wyoming wasn't just dirt and cattle. It was my bloodline. 70 years I walked that land, breathed that clean air, and fixed every fence post with my own 2 hands. My daughter Sarah always hated it. She saw the dust, the distance, and the hard work. She married a city slicker, Mark, who convinced her that this sprawling, beautiful piece of Wyoming was just wasted potential. Their voices, oozing with entitlement, always echoed the same sentiment. Dad needs to retire, sell up, and stop wasting this valuable asset. They didn't see value. They saw a fast track to a European vacation. They saw their inheritance coming early. Side note: if you're hooked by stories of ultimate betrayal and clever long-term revenge, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss the intricate details of how I flipped the script on them. My health had been acting up. A small but scary cardiac incident. Sarah and Mark saw weakness, not illness. It was their window. I was in the hospital, recovering, barely able to read the newspapers when the calls started. Sweet, concerned calls, which were really just fishing expeditions to figure out where I kept the land deeds and the trust paperwork. They used my temporary vulnerability against me, leveraging power of attorney documents I'd signed years ago for emergency purposes. Documents they immediately misused. They managed to push through the sale of the ranch to a massive, arrogant development company called Apex Corp. I knew what they were doing. I didn't stop them. Why? Because you don't reveal your hand when the stakes are this high. You wait until the perfect, irreversible moment. I had my own trusted lawyer, Martha, who was keeping an eye on the paperwork, but only on the surface level. I allowed Sarah and Mark to believe they had successfully executed the perfect crime. The final confirmation came 2 weeks later. I was home, sitting on the porch swing they had bought me years ago, a sentimental item that now felt like a joke. The phone rang. It was Sarah, calling from a noisy European airport, her voice high-pitched and vibrating with triumphant malice. "Well, Dad," she chirped, the sound grating like sandpaper. "We did it. $2 million. Apex Corp closed the deal this morning. Mark and I are leaving the country, and you won't have to worry about the upkeep anymore." She paused, and then the cruelest part, a high, breathless laugh. "Goodbye, Dad. Enjoy your retirement. You have no idea how much debt this ranch paid off for us. Now, if you need anything, maybe call a nurse? We'll send you a postcard from Paris." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just listened to her celebratory, venomous laughter, which quickly dissolved into the background noise of the terminal. I hung up the phone, placed it quietly on the table, and leaned back on the swing, staring out at the expansive, rolling Wyoming land that was now legally theirs. I felt a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. She had sold the land, yes, but she had made one crucial, multi-million-dollar mistake. She had forgotten one small, almost invisible piece of paper. And that paper, the deed to the entire water supply, was about to become the axe that chopped her entire spoiled life down at the knees. They had the dust. I had the lifeblood. The game had just begun. Sarah's mocking laughter faded, but its echo resonated, not with pain, but with profound satisfaction. She and Mark thought they'd outsmarted an old man. They had only sprung the latch on the cage I'd built for them decades ago. My quiet composure wasn't frailty. It was the stillness of a man who knows exactly what's coming next. To understand the genius, or the cruelty, of my plan, you need a quick lesson in Western law. In Wyoming, a state dominated by arid landscapes, the water rights are often more valuable than the land itself. You can own 1,000 acres, but if you don't legally control the river, the aquifers, or the spring that feeds your property, you own useless, dry dust. Sarah, raised here but desperate to escape, never truly absorbed that truth. Her city slicker husband Mark definitely hadn't. 40 years ago, long before Sarah was even contemplating betrayal, I was an attorney specializing in land and water law. I saw how quickly water disputes could turn into financial ruin. My foresight wasn't about protecting the ranch from outsiders. It was about protecting it from internal greed. Using my specialized knowledge, I legally segregated all the water rights attached to the ranch. I didn't just file a simple easement. I created a complex, airtight family water trust, assigning the rights to the trust, not the land deed itself. Crucially, the trust document stipulated that the primary beneficiary and sole managing trustee was me, Harry. These documents were filed deep within county records, referenced only by obscure legal codes and intentionally omitted from the standard, easy-to-read ranch title. When Sarah inherited the land's title, she inherited the property lines, but not a single drop of life-giving water. I allowed them to use my recent illness as their cue. I could sense their eagerness. While I lay in the hospital, I had one quiet conversation with Martha, my old legal partner. "Let them sell it, Martha," I instructed, my voice barely a whisper. "Let them feel the weight of $2 million in their hands." They had signed a standard disclosure, swearing they were selling the property in its entirety without undisclosed encumbrances. That was the central lie, the legal trapdoor. The rights to the water were technically not an encumbrance on the land. They were a completely separate, legally alienated asset, controlled by a different entity, my trust. They had committed fraud by omission, and they were too blinded by their greed to see the razor-sharp edge of the law they had just crossed. Now, as I watched the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun over my property, I knew my daughter and Mark were already celebrating on a plane to Europe. They were popping champagne, toasting their brilliance, convinced they had outsmarted their aging father. They thought they had secured their future. They had merely secured the date of their spectacular downfall. All I had to do now was wait for Apex Corp to start drilling. The tension was building, quiet but absolute. The day after Sarah's triumphant call, I got out of bed, shaved, and put on a suit for the first time in months. The illness had receded, replaced by a quiet, focused energy. My frailty had been their cue. My recovery was their doom. The first order of business was meeting with Martha. Not at her upscale downtown office, but at a discreet diner 60 miles away, a place where the coffee was strong and nobody asked questions. Martha, a brilliant woman who looked like a kindly grandmother but operated with the precision of a surgical strike, arrived exactly on time. She knew me well enough to sense the shift. I handed her a heavy, sealed folder containing the original Water Trust documents. "Apex Corp bought the ranch, Martha," I stated simply. She didn't react immediately. She opened the folder, and over the smell of stale donuts, her eyes scanned the complex legalese I drafted decades ago. The expression on her face slowly morphed from professional calm to stunned admiration. "Harry," she whispered, leaning closer, "this is masterful. A complete alienation of the water rights from the surface estate,
filed under a proprietary code, tied into the state's historic usage registry. It's flawless. They bought a beautiful multi-million-dollar piece of high desert. I merely nodded. They bought the dust, Martha. I still own the lifeblood. Our meeting focused on timing. We needed to let Apex Corp commit to the deal. We needed them to invest heavily in the land before we dropped the legal bomb. If we acted too soon, they might void the sale and sue Sarah, but they wouldn't be truly ruined. I wanted the full, spectacular fallout. I wanted the developer to be so furious, so financially entangled, that they would do all the hard work of vengeance for me. While we planned the legal strike, Sarah and Mark were living their lavish fantasy. My private investigator, a discreet contact I'd maintained for years, hidden from my daughter, sent me daily updates. Photos of expensive dinners in Paris, designer clothes, and smug, self-satisfied smiles. They were bleeding my $2 million dry, believing their newfound wealth was untouchable. They even called Martha once, demanding I sign over the deed to some old farm equipment, convinced I was too weak to notice the theft. Martha played the role of the sympathetic, slightly overwhelmed associate, telling them, "Oh, Mr. Jensen is just resting, dear. He'll sign soon." This entire dance was a psychological war. I had to maintain the illusion of total defeat. It was agonizing to see strangers, and worse, my own daughter, treating my legacy like a disposable commodity. But every photo, every arrogant phone call, just fueled the quiet fire of my resolve. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and now we only needed to wait for the first shovel to hit the dirt. That would be our signal. The developer's arrival was imminent. A week after my meeting with Martha, the quiet solitude of the ranch was shattered. The developers, Apex Corp, arrived like an invasion. It wasn't just a couple of guys with clipboards. It was a caravan of shiny black SUVs, heavy equipment trailers, and a surveying crew that looked less like engineers and more like soldiers staking a claim. Their arrival felt like a physical desecration of the land I loved. I watched them from the adjacent hill, public land, safely out of sight, through a pair of powerful binoculars. I had temporarily moved into a small, rented cabin nearby, maintaining the illusion that I had accepted my fate and was packing up to leave Wyoming entirely. The Apex CEO, a younger man named Trevor, was the picture of corporate arrogance. He wore a crisp, expensive suit that seemed utterly ridiculous against the backdrop of sagebrush and rugged terrain. He strode across the fields, pointing aggressively at different sections of my ranch, talking animatedly into a satellite phone. His entire posture screamed, "This is mine now, and I will conquer it." Their focus was immediate and intense. They were planning a large-scale housing development, a luxury high-desert community, as their press release later called it. They started marking out roads and pads for foundations. This was exactly what I wanted. Every hour they spent, every stake they drove into the ground, every dollar they invested in preliminary infrastructure deepened the hole they were digging for themselves. I noticed their surveying team seemed particularly interested in the dry creek beds and the locations of the old, unused water tanks. I could almost hear their internal discussions. "We need to locate the main water sources immediately. We can't build a community without guaranteed supply." Their geological reports, which they clearly trusted implicitly, must have indicated a strong aquifer beneath the land. They were confident, overconfident. I remembered the days when Sarah and Mark had tried to convince me to sell. "Dad, the ranch is just sitting there, not earning anything," Mark had scoffed. Now, Apex was pouring money into that sitting land, based on a title deed that was fundamentally hollow.
It was torturous watching them treat my home like a disposable commodity. They tore down a beloved old barn that had stood for generations without a moment's hesitation. The impulse to drive down there and reveal my secret was overwhelming, but I held firm. Premature rage would cost me the entire operation. This wasn't about the barn. It was about justice and the complete reversal of their betrayal. I took a deep breath, lowering the binoculars. My daughter and her husband were posting glamorous, slightly obnoxious photos of themselves in Italy, utterly oblivious to the meticulous, unseen legal machinery grinding into gear back in Wyoming. They were celebrating the destruction of my past, unaware that the foundation of their new future was built on sand. And soon, that sand wouldn't even be wet. I gave them 2 more days of investment before the next phase of the plan would activate. The drilling phase. That's when the real panic would begin. The heavy equipment finally arrived, a massive drilling rig, far larger than any machine I ever needed on the ranch. Apex Corp wasn't looking for a modest well. They were looking to guarantee water for 1,000 new homes. It was a multi-million-dollar commitment to an infrastructure that required a vast, confirmed water source. I watched the rig set up near the deepest valley, a spot where they clearly assumed the water table would be highest. The noise was deafening, a relentless metallic groan that echoed across the plains. For days, the only sound was the engine roaring and the rhythmic, grinding descent of the drill bit. It was the sound of Apex Corp betting their money against my 40-year-old foresight. On the 3rd day, the drilling suddenly stopped. The engine went quiet. From my observation point, I saw the crew chief scrambling. He was talking into his radio, his movements quick and agitated. Then, Trevor, the CEO, arrived on site again, his expensive jacket now dusty. He looked furious. He pointed at the rig, then at the ground, then back at the chief. The body language was clear. Where is the water? Apex Corp's geologist had promised them success. Their initial surveys must have been based on regional data, not specific, on-site confirmation of water rights. They had assumed ownership of the land meant ownership of everything beneath it. That was their critical mistake. Even if they hit a massive underground reservoir, they legally had no right to draw from it. But the sight of their immediate physical frustration, the lack of any success, was a delicious precursor to the legal reality. They decided to pull the rig and move it. They moved to the northern boundary, near the river, the most obvious place. Trevor must have been sweating millions now. Pulling a deep drilling rig and resetting it is incredibly costly, a clear sign of desperation and miscalculation. This was the moment of maximum financial exposure I had been waiting. 4. They were deep enough into the project, both financially and structurally, that retreating was unthinkable. I finally called Martha. My voice was low and firm. They've drilled twice, Martha. They are financially committed and professionally humiliated. It's time to send the letter. Martha's voice, usually so calm, held a tremor of excitement. The cease and desist, Harry? The one detailing the water trust? Yes, I confirmed. Send it via registered mail and certified courier, directly to Trevor, the CEO, and his entire legal department. Make sure the package includes a detailed, notarized copy of the Water Resource Alienation Trust documents. They need to see the precise, horrifying legal trap they walked into. The time for subtlety is over. Now they get the full, blunt force of the law. I hung up, feeling the final tension before the release. Sarah and Mark were still overseas, perhaps choosing their next designer handbag. Soon, their blissful European holiday would be brutally interrupted by a frantic call from an enraged CEO, whose company was suddenly sitting on a $2 million plot of highly valuable, yet utterly worthless, dry dirt. The legal bomb was armed and ready to drop. The legal notice landed in the plush, high-rise offices of Apex Corp in Denver, exactly 48 hours after I gave Martha the signal. It wasn't a standard, easily dismissible letter. It was a dense, certified legal package containing the cease and desist order and the full arcane documentation of the family water trust I had established 4 decades prior. The initial reaction in the Apex legal department must have been confusion, followed swiftly by professional terror. They had done their due diligence, they thought, reviewing the public records for encumbrances on the land title. But my water rights were not an encumbrance. They were a legally alienated asset, filed separately and obscurity referenced. I received a highly professional, yet utterly panicked call from Martha late that afternoon. "Harry, they are in full meltdown," she reported, her voice buzzing with contained excitement. "Their lead counsel called me, practically yelling. He can't believe it. He said they ran the titles, but this trust, it's ironclad. It's referenced under the historic agricultural statutes, completely separate from the surface rights deed they bought." The realization hitting Apex Corp was simple and devastating. They had paid $2 million for a beautiful, strategically located piece of property, and spent another few million on preliminary infrastructure and drilling attempts, only to find out they could not legally draw a single gallon of water from it. The land was useless for development without a guaranteed water supply. Their entire multi-million-dollar luxury housing project was dead before the first foundation was poured. The tension in the air at the ranch, even observed from afar, was palpable. The drilling crew packed up, not with the usual noise of transition, but with silent, grim efficiency. Trevor, the CEO, returned one last time. He wasn't yelling. He was standing stone still on the desolate land, staring at the dry earth as if it had personally betrayed him. I watched him throw his expensive phone into his SUV in a fit of impotent rage. His rage wasn't aimed at me, not yet. It was aimed at the people who had signed the documents swearing there were no undisclosed liabilities. Sarah and Mark. They had committed clear fraud by failing to disclose the separate water trust. Apex Corp now held an asset that was financially toxic, and they needed immediate restitution. This was the perfect execution of my plan. I hadn't gone to court yet. I hadn't spent a cent on a massive lawsuit. I simply presented the truth, and Apex Corp's own corporate survival instincts were doing the work for me. They were the ones about to declare war on my daughter. They were the ones with unlimited legal resources, demanding their $2 million back, plus damages. The time for Sarah and Mark to enjoy their ill-gotten gains was officially over. Their phone lines in Europe were about to start ringing with a panic far greater than anything they had ever felt. The hunter had become the hunted, and the corporate lawyers were closing in fast. The day after the legal documents landed, my temporary cabin in the hills started receiving relentless phone calls. The first calls were from Apex Corp's frantic legal team, trying to establish who exactly Harry Jensen, trustee, was. I let Martha handle those, maintaining my silence. Then, the CEO, Trevor, bypassed his own lawyers and called me directly, somehow finding my private cell number. His voice, once arrogant, was now a volatile mixture of pleading and pure, unadulterated fury. "Mr. Jensen," he began, attempting a professional tone that immediately cracked. "We need to discuss this water situation. This is a monumental oversight, a catastrophic error for our company. We paid $2 million to the previous owners, your daughter, Sarah, who frankly committed fraud." "She did, didn't she?" I interrupted calmly. My voice was low, measured, carrying the weight of decades. He ignored my remark, speeding up. "Look, we can fix this. This is about money. What do you want for the water rights? I'll give you $500,000 today. Cash. Wire transfer. Just sign a simple agreement to transfer the trust." $500,000. A fortune to many, but it was nothing compared to the principle of the matter. And it was nothing compared to the agony my daughter had caused me. "Mr. Trevor," I said, keeping my tone flat, "the ranch and the water represents my entire family's legacy. My daughter chose to sell that legacy for a quick vacation fund. You dealt with her, not me. And you bought a property with known, registered legal restrictions on its most valuable asset. That's your corporate due diligence failure." He grew desperate. "$1 million, Mr. Jensen. I'll give you a full $1 million. This project is worth hundreds of millions. Just name your price. We can settle this privately." I let the silence hang for a moment, letting him absorb the finality of my next words. "The price for my legacy is not for sale, Mr. Trevor. Especially not to repair the damage caused by those who betrayed me. You need to understand something. I didn't establish that trust to sell the water later. I established it to guarantee the land could never be easily sold or developed by greedy hands. You are now holding a piece of useless dirt, and I feel zero obligation to bail you out. If you want your money back, I suggest you sue the people who lied to you." I hung up before he could respond. The conversation was exactly what I needed. It confirmed his desperation and, more importantly, redirected his massive corporate fury squarely onto Sarah and Mark. He was a corporate shark who had been publicly humiliated and financially gutted. He wouldn't just walk away. He would tear apart the people responsible. My hands were clean, and my revenge was now being executed by one of the most powerful development companies in the state. The stage was perfectly set for Sarah and Mark's downfall. While I was enjoying the quiet satisfaction of Trevor's furious silence, Sarah and Mark were enjoying the peak of their stolen European honeymoon. My investigators' photos showed them yachting off the coast of Capri one day and sipping expensive wine in a Tuscan villa the next. They were living large, completely detached from the consequences unfolding thousands of miles away. Their fantasy shattered on a Tuesday morning. The first sign of trouble wasn't a pleasant call from Dad. It was a series of panicked, aggressive notifications. Mark's phone, which he had smugly kept charged for checking stock prices, started buzzing relentlessly. It wasn't the bank. It was a blistering email from their transaction lawyer in the U.S., followed by a certified letter sent by private courier straight to their temporary European address. The subject line of the email was simple: "Immediate freeze and fraud allegations. Apex Corp. versus Jensen." The $2 million, which they had been rapidly spending, was now legally tainted funds. Apex Corp., armed with their army of corporate lawyers, had swiftly filed an emergency injunction and a massive civil fraud lawsuit, naming Sarah and Mark as defendants. They alleged that the pair had knowingly and maliciously failed to disclose the critical water rights alienation, rendering the entire sale void and demanding the full purchase price back, plus damages for their wasted development costs. I imagined the scene: Sarah and Mark, sitting in a beautiful sun-drenched European hotel room,
their celebratory champagne turning sour in their mouths. Mark, the supposed financial strategist, must have been the first to panic. He had overseen the legal disclosure
process, assuring Sarah it was simple. "Sarah, what did you sign? Did you read the fine print?" Mark's voice, I imagined, would be sharp and laced with terror. "It was just the standard deed, Mark. You said Dad was senile, that we just needed his signature on the power of attorney. You handled the legal part," Sarah would scream back, her pampered voice turning shrill. Their euphoria quickly dissolved into brutal mutual accusations. The realization dawned that their wealth wasn't solid. It was merely a temporary illusion built on a foundation of betrayal. They couldn't spend the money. They couldn't access their frozen U.S. accounts, and they were legally compelled to return to Wyoming to face the lawsuit. Their dream trip was officially a forced, terrifying return. The subsequent flight home would have been the longest of their lives. No more first-class comfort, just the cold, hard realization that every luxury item they had purchased was now evidence of fraud. They had gambled their family ties, their reputation, and their financial security on one single transaction. And they had lost everything to an old man's foresight. The climax was rapidly approaching, and it would happen not in the quiet halls of a dusty ranch, but under the harsh lights of a Wyoming courtroom. They were returning home not as millionaires, but as defendants facing total ruin. Sarah and Mark arrived back in the U.S. not in triumph, but in terror. They were immediately served with court papers that detailed the sheer scale of the fraud allegations. Apex Corp wasn't just demanding the $2 million back. They were demanding millions more in compensatory damages for project delays, legal fees, and reputational damage. My former lawyer, Martha, represented the Water Trust, while Apex Corp had a team of 3 sharp-suited litigators tearing into Sarah and Mark. The courtroom was sterile, quiet, and packed with the tension of high-stakes finance. I sat in the back row, not as the plaintiff, but as a disinterested observer, the trustee of the property's most crucial asset. I wore a simple suit, my composure absolute. When Sarah spotted me, her eyes, usually clouded with city impatience, went wide with shock. It wasn't the look of a victim. It was the look of a trapped predator realizing the bait was poisoned. Mark, pale and sweating, kept glancing at me, trying to decipher my neutrality. They had expected an elderly, defeated man. They got a calm, strategic adversary. The pivotal moment came when Apex Corp's lead counsel presented the deeds. He displayed the land title Sarah had signed, clean, clear, and worth $2 million. Then he displayed the Water Resource Alienation Trust document, filed 40 years ago by myself. He pointed out the obscure filing codes and the fact that Sarah and Mark had sworn under oath that no known encumbrances existed. The defendants, the counsel stated, his voice ringing with authoritative disgust, knowingly misrepresented the assets. They sold a beautiful but utterly dry piece of land for a premium, knowing that the only thing that made it valuable, the water, was legally controlled by Mr. Jensen's trust. They committed fraud, purely for personal enrichment. Sarah finally broke. During a recess, she stormed over, her face contorted with a desperate, pathetic rage. "Dad! You bastard! You let me do this! You let us sell it! You knew this would happen!" I looked her dead in the eye, my expression unmoving. "I let you reveal your true character, Sarah. You didn't steal my money. You stole my trust, thinking I was too weak to notice. A lawyer always knows his own documents. You failed to do your due diligence, and you lied on a legal contract. That's not my fault. That is the cost of your greed. The judge's ruling was swift and absolute. Sarah and Mark were found liable for civil fraud. The $2 million was ordered returned to Apex Corp from their frozen accounts. Furthermore, they were hit with a massive judgment for Apex Corp's damages, effectively wiping out every other asset they possessed. Their European fantasy had cost them not only their stolen gains, but also their remaining financial security. They were ruined, professionally, financially, and morally. The betrayal had come full circle. I hadn't lifted a finger to sue them. I simply watched as the powerful corporate machine they had tried to swindle executed my perfect, legal revenge. The ranch was now essentially mine again, free from the greedy claims of both the developer and my daughter. The dust settled, both literally on the Wyoming prairie and figuratively in the courthouse. Sarah and Mark were ruined. The $2 million was gone, returned to the furious corporate coffers of Apex Corp. Their luxurious European life was over, replaced by a harsh reality of debt, lawsuits, and a destroyed reputation. They eventually filed for bankruptcy, the price of their betrayal proving far steeper than they could have ever imagined. I haven't heard from them since the final gavel fell, and I didn't seek contact. The chapter was closed. I, however, was not only intact, but financially stronger and legally validated. With the sale voided and Apex Corp out of the picture, I regained full, undisputed ownership of the ranch. The legal fees were minimal, covered by the settlement with Apex Corp, who were eager to close the whole embarrassing chapter. I used the small but substantial amount of compensation awarded to the Water Trust to begin the long-delayed restoration of the ranch. I spent the next few months doing the work I loved, rebuilding the fences, repairing the old barn, the one they tore down I rebuilt better, and implementing modern, sustainable water management systems using the Trust's resources. The land felt clean again, purged of their greed. I wasn't just an old man sitting on land. I was a vibrant developer of my own legacy. I started a small, high-end, sustainable cattle operation, something Sarah always called dirty work, and found joy in every single sunrise. I often stand on the porch swing now, looking out over the fields. The betrayal was brutal, but it forced me to use the most powerful tool I possessed, my mind, and the knowledge I had spent a lifetime accumulating. My foresight protected my home, not my sentimentality. I chose justice and self-preservation over misplaced parental loyalty. The quiet life I lead now is rich, satisfying, and authentically mine. I am healthy, happy, and developing this land for the next generation, a generation I will choose wisely. I look at this vast, restored ranch, and I realize the biggest victory wasn't financial. It was proving that wisdom and preparation will always defeat arrogance and greed. This is the end of my story. Now, I have to ask you, did I do the right thing? Facing that level of cold-hearted betrayal from my own family, I felt I had no choice but to use my intelligence to protect my legacy. What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this ultimate revenge story and want to hear more tales of cunning strategy and sweet justice, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss another dramatic story, and drop a comment telling me your thoughts. The end. Thank you for listening.